It's May 29, 1968. Extra time in the European Cup final with the score at a deadlock. Suddenly, the crowd erupts at Wembley.
Waiting to receive was mighty best. He simply walked the ball into the net. What a goal! United in the lead.
Manchester United become the first English club to win the European Cup. A 22-year-old George Best stands tall on his way to immortality. He would soon pick up the Ballon d'Or, the Football Writers' Player of the Year award, and so much more. In that moment, as the cheers echo into the London night, he is unstoppable. Looking back at this moment, I have no doubt that a familiar question has since drifted into the minds of those who stood witness. What is the true cost of greatness? The world doesn't yet know, can't yet know, the turbulent path that lies ahead for George Best.
At the moment, how would you describe your mental state?
At the moment, I think I'm a complete wreck. In every way.
George Best was, quite simply put, the equivalent of a rock star. In many ways, football's first and greatest rock star. He won everything available to him. As an individual, as part of a team, he was magical on the ball, a sight that kept everyone on their feet and sent defenders into unbridled panic. Along with Johan Cruyff, he was voted as the 5th best player of the 20th century by FIFA. He was that good. Back when players were assigned numbers by position, Best, at left wing, made the number 7 of Manchester United a near mythical number. Off the pitch, the winning didn't seem to stop. Money, cars, girls, fame. At a glance, he was a man that had it all. The sad reality is that Best was fighting demons the entire time. His greatest vices, unfortunately, brought upon his undoing. He was a complex character, his legacy maybe more so. Today, we look into why. In a post-war Northern Ireland, George Best was born in Belfast on May 22, 1946, into a family that loved football. He was a shy, skinny kid, extremely self-conscious, even mocked by girls his age for being too slight.
When I first came, there was nothing off me. There's nothing off me at the moment. There was even less then. I was only about 7 stone and about 5 foot nothing.
However, his father saw the natural talent within him early and did his best to encourage it. By his teens, it was clear that the boy was extraordinary. Although that wasn't clear to everyone. He idolized local club Glentoran growing up. Ironically, they passed up the opportunity to house him and rejected the boy for being too small. He stood at only about 5'5" by the time he was 15, but he was quick and cunning. So much so that in 1961, when Manchester United scout Bob Bishop spotted George playing in Belfast, he immediately knew something had to be done. Bishop then sent a now famous telegram to Manchester United manager Matt Busby. "I think I found you a genius." Those 7 words carried young Best all the way to Manchester. However, arriving at Old Trafford, the 15-year-old Best felt overwhelmed and homesick. So, he ran back to Belfast only days later when nobody was looking. It was only through the persuasion of Busby himself, speaking directly to his parents, that made him return. The club was determined to make him part of their future. Manchester United in the early 1960s was a club rebuilding from tragedy. Just a few years earlier, in 1958, the Munich air disaster had devastated United's bright young team, the famed Busby Babes. 8 were killed. 2 were injured beyond the point of being able to continue playing the game. Matt Busby himself was so seriously injured, twice it was believed that he was on death's door. Upon his recovery, he was determined to revitalize the club's fortunes. Chief among his arsenal, he brandished Bobby Charlton, another Munich survivor and Boyhood United man, and Dennis Law. Both were well established at the club by the time Best officially signed as a pro on his 17th birthday in 1963. In Best's first months, the club won the 1963 FA Cup, their first trophy since Munich. A glimmer of the good times returning to Old Trafford. Still, United's league form was inconsistent. They hadn't won a league title in years and rivals were on the rise. But it seemed that they had found the missing piece. Best made his senior debut in September of 1963 against West Brom in the league. Alternating between the wings, he showed no fear, nimbly evading brutal tackles from hardened defenders, helping United grind out a 1-0 victory. The fans took notice. He was still a reserve player, but by season's end, the 17-year-old had forced his way into being a regular starter. 26 appearances and 6 goals as United finished league runners-up. It was only up from here. Busby's rebuilt United struck gold in 1965. In Best's first full season as a starter, United became champions of England. 14 goals in 59 matches across all competitions, and he was proving to be more than the fans could have wished for. He would roam free, popping up in the midfield to win the ball, make plays, cutting inside. He wasn't glued to the touchline like a traditional winger. His versatility was stunning, and it really is worth emphasizing that the freedom he was given was not normal. It's famously reported that when he was a youth player, Busby instructed his coaching staff to not coach him too much, but rather let him develop in his own way, naturally. Best himself has stated on numerous occasions how much he very much disliked training. It's hardly a stretch to say that it was this very freedom that allowed the world to witness a truly unique talent and forced defenders to deal with something that they had never seen before. So let's set the scene. These swinging 60s are in full flow by this point. The Beatles rule the airwaves and London is the capital of everything cool. George Best's breakthrough into superstardom can be traced to one electrifying night. March 9, 1966 in Lisbon's Estádio da Luz, a European Cup quarterfinal. Manchester United take on a mighty Eusebio-led Benfica. Busby gave Best a simple instruction to start cautiously and defend, but the man had other ideas. What followed was a brace laced in attacking wizardry. The Portuguese crowd, initially hostile, was stunned in awe. Portuguese headlines the following day all read some variation of the same thing, O Quinto Beatle, the 5th Beatle. British newspapers, with the same sentiment, christened him El Beatle, splashing photos of George in a sombrero purchased in Lisbon across the front pages. A British footballer had never caused this kind of media frenzy before. And remember, he was only 19. He was the right man in the right era. Best had the looks and the talent. In an age when footballers were often only known by sports enthusiasts, Best crossed over into mainstream celebrity. Boys and girls of all ages couldn't get enough of him.
You say you think of yourself as a footballer, but you must know that in fact you're more than that today with a lot of the kids. I mean, you are in fact a pop star, as much a pop star as Jagger or as any of the Beatles. You're aware of this?
I am, yeah, because I think football is just another branch of entertainment, and I'm just another entertainer, as far as I'm concerned.
He appeared on talk shows where the masses were able to catch a glimpse of his personality, and wouldn't you know it, the man was insanely charismatic. He appeared in fashion spreads. His every move on and off the field became headlining news. Muhammad Ali, the Beatles, George Best, all names that comfortably belonged in the same sentence. There are a few important pieces of context I feel are necessary to fully understand all of this. Number 1, after the Munich disaster, the outcry from the football world to see United get back to their former glory was immense. For example, Real Madrid offered Manchester United Alfredo Di Stefano on loan while they rebuilt their squad. Di Stefano was that year's Ballon d'Or winner, by the way. It wasn't some throwaway. This was his second Ballon d'Or too. He was Real Madrid's star piece. This was a genuine, heartfelt showing of support. There are many stories that carry the same sentiment. And so, for that very reason, Manchester United became somewhat of the quote-unquote second favorite team for people all around Europe, exploding the fan base as millions desperately wanted to see them succeed. Number 2, in post-war Britain, celebrity culture was really kicking into gear, with people latching onto pop culture figures and following their every move. And then pops up a man who affectionately came to be known as Georgie. He was one of a kind. And it's not hard to see why people felt that way. Apart from his physical appearance, the man absolutely walked the walk at his day job. Defenders would literally go out on the pitch intending to break his legs. In response, he rode and evaded tackles that would shatter today's players. it seemed impossible to hurt him, said Manchester City manager Joe Mercer in 1969. Off the pitch, the Rockstar lifestyle was taking shape. Best reveled in the London nightlife. Beautiful women, fast cars, trendy outfits. The man liked to party. And bear in mind that right now in the story, we've only reached the point of superstardom. We now move on to immortality. 1968. The absolute summit of Best's career. The moment talent, team, and timing all came together. In the 1967-68 football season, Best was simply unstoppable. He scored 28 goals in 41 league appearances, finishing as the top scorer in England and propelling the club to a European Cup final for the first time. At Wembley that May, against Benfica, the stage was set for glory. And Best delivered. After a grueling 90 minutes locked at 1-1, 3 minutes into extra time, Best produced that iconic goal, sliding the ball into the net after hypnotizing the keeper. Benfica were dazed and confused, with United taking advantage of that fact and scoring 2 more goals, going on to win the game 4-1 and becoming the first English club to lift the European Cup. As captain and soon-to-be Sir Bobby Charlton and manager and soon-to-be Sir Matt Busby embraced in tears, the realization that this joyous victory came a decade after Munich's despair was likely not lost on those that were present. And in the midst of all of this, Best was being hailed as the king of European football. Ballon d'Or, FWA Footballer of the Year, the whole lot. By 22 years of age, Georgie Best had won absolutely everything. Yet, in the afterglow of European glory, shadows already loomed. It truly would not get any better than this. As 1968 turned to 1969, Manchester United as a team started showing cracks. Aging stars and weak new recruits meant the burden on Best grew heavier. Busby retired at the end of the 68-69 season, and Best later admitted, "I increasingly had the feeling that I was carrying the team at times on the pitch." The party of 68 was over. Now a hangover loomed. Figuratively, and in George's case, literally.
I just couldn't handle all the press and the publicity and the things that went with it. And I tried to hide through alcohol, and it just doesn't work.
As United's form dipped and pressures mounted, Best sought refuge in nightlife. Teammates would later recall that keeping George in on a Friday night became nearly impossible. The pull of pubs and clubs was too strong. However, it seems that this wasn't as big of an issue as you might think. He was still magnificent on the pitch. He scored 22 goals in the 68-69 season, but off of it, his discipline began to waver. With Busby, somewhat of a father figure to Best, gone, United went through a succession of managers who struggled to control or understand Best. As United's fortunes declined in the early 70s, Best's behavior grew more and more erratic. A classic case of a young man with too much fame and not enough boundaries. He began picking up suspensions for unbecoming behavior on the pitch. In January 1971, he was summoned to an FA disciplinary hearing for various misdeeds. George showed up 3 hours late. The officials were not amused, and he received a 6-week ban and a fine, the heftiest punishment the FA had ever bestowed on a player. On numerous occasions, Best skipped United matches and training entirely.
No one at Old Trafford has seen George Best since Manchester United's 3-0 defeat at West Ham last Saturday. Other members of the team have been training daily, but there's been no sign of the talented but temperamental Irishman.
This particular occasion went down in 1972. Instead of lacing up his boots for an away game at Chelsea, he decided to spend a long weekend with an actress in London. And this wasn't the first time it had happened. However, it's one that generated a lot of headlines. For 3 days, every newspaper in the country read some variation of Best missing. This was scandalous stuff at the time. United promptly suspended him for 2 weeks. Best's priorities were clearly shifting. At this point, it seemed that there was only one thing that could sort him out and bring back our Georgie, Sir Matt Busby. Busby returned on an interim basis while the club searched for a manager to shut the revolving door. And would you look at that, Best ended the season as the top scorer in England once more, and despite all the troubles, finished 3rd in the Ballon d'Or voting for 1971. He still had what it took to be great. Sadly, it appears he was too far gone. As the sheer unpredictability of his behavior escalated, come 1972, Best shocked the world and announced his retirement at 26 years old.
I can't play as I could before, so I don't want to play a lower standard than I'm used to myself. And I don't think I can play at a high standard, so I've decided to quit.
The announcement came during another one of his disappearing acts, this time from the Northern Ireland national team training camp. This time in a luxury hotel in Marbella, Spain, where journalists had hunted him down for a scoop. However, he returned from this self-imposed exile only a few months later for the 72-73 season. But by this point, he was well and truly done. The drop in quality and output was stark. Only 6 goals scored all season. He missed training frequently, was spending most of his time in Manchester pubs, even reportedly having mattresses in the back rooms of certain pubs for nights when he had had one too many, which was many of those nights. A new manager, Tommy Docherty, came in to try solve the madness. He tried one last roll of the dice to save Best's United career, but nothing came of it. Years of nightlife and neglected training had affected his fitness. Teammates noticed he had lost much of his blistering pace. He was carrying weight and often looked sluggish. On New Year's Day 1974, he pulled on the United shirt for what would be the final time. This was before failing to show up to training one more time and never returning to the squad. 27 years old, once thought to be the new long-term face for the game, now a shadow of his former self. And as he sank deeper and deeper into the abyss, as did Manchester United, relegated to the second division. As you've probably guessed by now, throughout all of this, Best was never shy about what was going on in his life. He was quite candid in the press about his lifestyle, about his exploits, the women, the cars, the booze, all of it. When announcing his first retirement, he admitted to not fully understanding the consequences of his public profile.
Well, I used to do things for publicity, hoping that I'd get my name in the papers and people would take notice of me. And then I ended up and I didn't want to see my name in the papers. I started an image on purpose 6 or 7 years ago, and it just backfired on me.
Having created the persona, which was not a reflection of who he really was, he began to question whether that was actually true or not.
I started believing what they were writing about me.
Onlookers in the footballing world didn't seem to envy him either.
Victim of circumstances, George Best. George had a lot of girls, yeah.
But I mean, why is this then? They don't chase after film stars in the same way, or at least they don't get them.
The film stars are on the screen, but you don't see them as much as football players. They're in the open. I mean, George Best, everything he does is publicised. And I feel sorry for him.
After leaving Manchester United, George Best became a football nomad. A superstar without a home, wandering from club to club in search of something. In the decades after 1974, Best would play for an astonishing array of teams. 14 clubs across 5 continents. In mid-1974, mere months after his United exit, Best popped up in South Africa, of all places, playing a handful of matches for the Jewish Guild of Johannesburg. There was a surreal friendly appearance for Dunstable United, a tiny English club where Best turned out just to help an old friend draw a crowd. 4th Division with Stockport County, then Cork Celtic in Ireland. There was a pattern to all of this. Best's appearances would boost ticket sales and cause a media stir, but soon the novelty wore off and so did his interest. He headed for the North American Soccer League with the Los Angeles Aztecs in 1976. It made sense that he went full Hollywood. Initially, he thrived, scoring 15 goals in 24 games. In 1977, he was even named the league's midfielder of the year. He would play for 2 more American sides in Fort Lauderdale Strikers and San Jose Earthquakes. It was with the latter that he scored what's often referred to as the greatest goal in the history of the NASL, bobbing and weaving through bodies and sliding it past the keeper. The American years were a great international episode. But those years also saw him completely vanish from training, clash with officials, treat the American League as a playground at times, and dive deeper and deeper into the bottle as he fully embraced the celebrity lifestyle as he had never done before. He kept the world tour going, stints back in England, Scotland, China, Australia, The tales of his escapades in this period have been told, retold, and told again by reporters, onlookers, Best himself, and more as the stuff of legends over the years. There was a time in 1970 when, during one of his disappearing acts, Best hit big at the casino. Later that night, a bellboy would enter Best's hotel room and discover the man in the midst of his victory lap, literally covered in thousands of pounds, in bed with Marjorie Wallace, Miss World at the time. Best describes their interaction.
As he was leaving, he turned around and he said to me, he said, "Mr. Best," he said, "I've got to ask you something." And he's turned around, he's looked at this Miss World strutting around with no clothes on all the money in a bed. And he said to me, "Where did it all go wrong?"
Now, this is a tale that Best himself has retold time and time again, with the details being a little different each time, but the premise remaining the same. He was later arrested for allegedly stealing Wallace's passport and checkbook to prevent her from leaving the country after a nasty breakup. The charges were later dropped. Or how about the time when Best was with Hibernian in 1979? The French national rugby team were in town for an international fixture. Best, who was apparently trying to change his ways, joined them for a legendary drinking spree that led to him missing a match and having his contract terminated. When asked about it, he famously said, "Don't forget, there were 15 of them and only one of me." Hibernian would later sign him back a week later, likely as they were unable to resist the boost in attendance his mere presence provided. Best was still loved by everybody for his past brilliance and for his present flaws. The tragic genius was still irresistible. Everywhere he went, people were excited just to catch a glimpse of Georgie Best. By 1984, the boots were finally hung up, and George Best's footballing adventure was over. The tragedy was that Best's real battles, the ones with his inner demons, were yet to even enter their fiercest stages.
I am one of millions of people around the world who suffer from what is a disease called alcoholism. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say that I couldn't just have one drink and leave it at that, because I couldn't. Because it affects me differently in my system.
By the mid-80s, Best had hit rock bottom. His first marriage had fallen apart. He had been to rehab, but only ever managed a few months at most of sobriety. After retiring from football for good, Best had too much idle time and too many temptations. The stories from this period are sad. He would go on weeks-long benders, vanish from contact, then resurface remorseful. He got into legal trouble. In '84, a drunk Best was behind the wheel and got caught and charged with drunk driving. He made it worse by assaulting the police officer who came to arrest him after he skipped a court appearance. He spent Christmas in jail. Overall, he served about 8 weeks of a 3-month sentence in prison. The mugshot of George Best, unshaven, blurry-eyed, was a heartbreaking sight. He has had several reported incidents involving assault of women. In 1972, he was arrested and charged with assaulting a waitress in a Manchester nightclub where he allegedly fractured her nose. His ex-wife, Alex Percy, alleged that he frequently punched her in the face during their marriage. In 2005, Best was arrested on suspicion of assault on a woman outside the home of an ex-girlfriend. He was not charged. Financial problems mounted too. He was declared bankrupt in '82. The fortune he earned in his United days squandered on his luxurious lifestyle and bad investments. Luckily for Best, he may have been done as a player, but his charisma was still intact, so naturally he turned to punditry. When he was sober, he was witty, charming, and insightful about the game. He appeared on talk shows and provided color commentary on TV. He even tried his hand at stand-up comedy.
Over the years, when I've been playing football, I've had this reputation of going missing. Miss United Kingdom, Miss England.
He sold books, made speaking appearances. As per his own admission, he had more opportunities coming his way than when he was an active player. By the late 90s, decades of hard living had ravaged Best's body. His liver began to fail. In 2000, he spent weeks in the hospital for severe liver problems and was told bluntly that he would die if he didn't stop drinking. He did not stop drinking. And so, in 2002, in a last bid for survival, Best underwent a liver transplant. The operation gave him a second chance physically. Many hoped, prayed, that this might also be the psychological turning point. The liver transplant was paid for by the NHS. and many were vocal about the fact that somebody with a better track record for caring for their liver and with less access to resources was overlooked to save Best. For a time, he did stay sober, but addiction is merciless. He knew his drug of choice was a killer, but didn't stop him. Best was spotted with alcohol numerous times within only a year of the transplant, reigniting the controversy. In autumn 2005, his body could fight no more. He was admitted to a hospital with flu-like symptoms that turned out to be a kidney infection related to the immunosuppressant drugs from the transplant. After several weeks of intensive care, on November 25, 2005, George Best passed on, aged 59, in London's Cromwell Hospital. In his final days, he poignantly allowed a photograph of himself in his hospital bed to be published in a newspaper with the caption, "Don't die like I did." It was a dying man's attempt to turn his life into a cautionary tale for others about the horrors of alcoholism. The world mourned as a giant of the game had passed. Despite everything, people remembered the genius, the joy, and even the charm. Years on from his passing, his name still evokes awe among football fans of all ages, most of whom never saw him play. There is a near universal agreement that George Best is amongst the greatest talents to ever play the game. There is also a prevailing belief that Best did not fulfill his potential. It's hard to argue, considering how early he peaked and how early he crumbled, that he is indeed a massive what-if story. What if he had the guidance, the discipline, the boundaries, you name it? Nonetheless, his career was still one of extreme success, and we cannot overlook that. In Manchester, his legacy speaks for itself. He stands immortalized outside of Old Trafford alongside his teammates Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton. To this day, Manchester United's famous number 7 shirt carries the prestige it does largely because of Best. In Belfast, he is immortalized in multiple ways. Through murals and landmarks, Belfast City Airport was renamed George Best Belfast City Airport in 2006. On what would have been his 60th birthday. And even with his more unscrupulous behavior, he inspired positivity. Best was, in Sir Alex Ferguson's words, a case study in talent mismanaged. Not by any ill intent, but because in the 60s, there was no precedent for a George Best, whom coincidentally was only 5 years younger than Sir Alex Ferguson. No one knew how to deal with a lad becoming a footballing superstar at a very young age. For every young player that came through the ranks at Manchester United, your Nevilles, Beckhams, Ronaldos, Giggses, there was always a lot of cross-referencing between their man management compared to Best's and how to steer them clear of controversy. This was particularly the case with Cristiano Ronaldo, young teenager thrust into a foreign land with no family, friends, or support and guidance network. The mistakes of the past were corrected for the future. Maradona good, Pele better, George Best. You've definitely heard that one before. The boy from Belfast, the tragic genius, and truly football's first rock star.